She walked into Judge Judy's courtroom with her chin high, her designer bag swinging, and a smirk that said she'd already won. She was wrong. What happened over the next 47 minutes would be replayed millions of times online. It would be dissected in legal forums, shared in community groups, quoted in op-eds about privilege and accountability. It would make grown adults stand up from their couches and cheer at their screens. But before we get to the moment that silenced an entire courtroom, before we get to the look on her face when Judge Judy leaned forward and said those 7 words that nobody expected, we need to go back to where this all began. Because this story isn't just about a courtroom. It's about a woman who had spent her entire life believing that the rules didn't apply to her, that her zip code, her skin color, her social status gave her a kind of invisible armor, a force field that protected her from consequences. And it's about the moment that armor, piece by piece, word by word, was stripped away in front of millions. Let me set the scene for you. It was a Tuesday morning in Los Angeles. The kind of morning where the sun comes up bright and hot and the city feels like it's already moving too fast. The courtroom was packed, standing room only in the gallery. The audience sat in neat rows, a mix of curious onlookers, court regulars, and people who'd shown up not quite knowing what they were about to witness. The cameras were rolling. Judge Judy's production team was set up the way they always were, efficient, quiet, professional. The crew had filmed hundreds of cases, disputes over car accidents, neighbor feuds, landlord drama, loan disagreements, but something about today felt different. Even before the case began, there was a charge in the air. A kind of electricity that the veteran crew members would later say they hadn't felt in years. And then she walked in. Her name was Karen Whitfield, 44 years old, real estate agent, resident of a gated community in Calabasas, California. She was dressed impeccably, a cream-colored blazer, pressed slacks, heels that clicked against the courtroom floor like a metronome counting down to something. She walked to the plaintiff's side of the courtroom with the confidence of someone who had never, not once in her entire life, been told no and actually believed it. Now here's where it gets interesting. Sitting across from her, at the defendant's table, was a man named Officer Darius Cole. Off duty that day, dressed in a simple button-down shirt and dark slacks, calm, measured, hands folded on the table in front of him. He didn't look at her when she walked in, and noticed that, because that detail matters. A man who knows exactly who he is doesn't need to look at his accuser for validation. He wasn't nervous, he wasn't defensive, he was simply present, ready. But here's what you need to know about why these two people were in the same courtroom on a Tuesday morning in Los Angeles. 6 weeks earlier, Karen Whitfield had filed a complaint, not just any complaint, a formal, documented, aggressively worded complaint against Officer Darius Cole, a 12-year veteran of the Los Angeles Police Department, with a spotless record, 3 commendations, and not a single sustained complaint in over a decade of service. Her claim? That Officer Cole had harassed her, discriminated against her, that he had, and these were her exact words, the words she had written down and signed her name to, acted in a racially motivated manner during a routine interaction in a parking lot outside a luxury grocery store in Calabasas. She had said he targeted her. She had said he was abusive. She had called him a racist. Now, let's pause right there, because I want you to really sit with that for a second. This is a black police officer, a man who had spent 12 years serving a community, who had put his body between danger and the public more times than most people ever will, being accused of racism by a white woman in a parking lot over what she described as a traumatic and threatening interaction. The complaint had gone up the chain. An internal review had been conducted, and at the end of that review, the department had found, with evidence, that Officer Cole had done nothing wrong. But Karen Whitfield wasn't done. She sued him, personally, in civil court, for emotional distress, for what she called targeted harassment. She wanted damages. She wanted his record marked. She wanted, if you read between the lines of her legal filing, to make sure that this man, this officer who had dared to approach her in a parking lot, paid a price for it. And that's how they both ended up in front of Judge Judy Scheindlin. But here's where things get disturbing, because when the production team reviewed the pre-case intake documents, the forms both parties fill out before filming, they noticed something small, something that Karen Whitfield probably didn't think anyone would catch, a detail buried in her paperwork that would, in about 47 minutes, blow her entire case apart. Nobody said a word about it yet. Not the producers, not the legal team, certainly not Officer Cole's side. They were waiting. And Judge Judy already knew. You could tell, if you watched her closely, the way she reviewed the documents before court was called to order. There was a stillness in her face, a calm that wasn't relaxed. It was focused, the way a surgeon looks before making the first cut. She had read everything. She knew exactly what was coming. The bailiff called the room to order. The audience settled. The cameras locked in, and Judge Judy walked out. The room went quiet the way rooms only go quiet when someone truly commanding enters them. Not out of formality, out of instinct. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, looked at the papers in front of her, and then she looked up, not at Karen Whitfield, not at Officer Cole. She looked directly into the camera. And in that single moment, before a single word had been spoken, before a single piece of evidence had been presented. Something in the room shifted. At this point, the entire courtroom felt it. Something wasn't right, and that something wasn't coming from the defendant's table. It was coming from the plaintiff. Karen Whitfield straightened in her seat. She smoothed the front of her blazer. She had prepared for this. She had rehearsed. She had her story locked and loaded. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the story she'd been telling for 6 weeks was about to collide with the truth. And truth, as Judge Judy has said many times, doesn't need a good memory, but liars do. They say a liar's biggest mistake isn't the lie itself. It's the smile they wear while telling it. Karen Whitfield was smiling, and that smile, that perfectly rehearsed, confidence-soaked, "I've already won" smile, was about to become the most expensive expression she'd ever made in her life. Because here's what nobody in that courtroom knew yet, except one person. The truth about what really happened in that parking lot wasn't just different from Karen's version. It was the complete opposite, but we're not there yet. And trust me, you're going to want every single detail before we get to that moment. Because when the reveal hits, it hits different when you understand exactly who these people are, what they came from, what they were really fighting for. So let's talk about the players. Let's really talk about them. Karen Whitfield did not grow up wealthy. That's the first thing you need to understand about her. And it's the thing that explains almost everything that came after. She grew up in a middle-class suburb of Phoenix, Arizona. Modest house, modest neighborhood. A father who worked in insurance. A mother who taught elementary school. Nothing wrong with that life. Nothing shameful about it. But Karen had decided very early, somewhere around the age of 16, according to people who knew her, that that life was beneath her, not the people in it, the circumstances of it. She wanted more. She wanted the bigger house, the better zip code, the dinner parties where people talked about their wine collections and their vacation homes. She wanted to be looked at differently, treated differently. And here's the psychological layer that matters. People who spend their entire lives chasing status, not comfort, not security, but status, develop a very particular kind of sensitivity. They become hyper-aware of anything they perceive as a threat to the image they've worked so hard to construct. A parking ticket feels like a personal attack. A correction feels like an insult. Someone in a uniform asking them a routine question feels like harassment. Because when your entire identity is built on being above ordinary friction becomes unbearable. By the time she was in her 40s, Karen Whitfield had made it, at least on the outside. The Calabasas address, the real estate license, the luxury SUV, the designer clothes, the gated community where, as she would later say in a deposition with extraordinary lack of self-awareness, people like us don't get bothered. People like us. Let that sentence breathe for a second. Let it sit exactly where she put it. People like us don't get bothered. Now let's talk about the man she decided to bother. Darius Cole was born and raised in Compton, California, the third of 5 children. His father worked 2 jobs. Nights at a warehouse, weekends doing landscaping. His mother was a home healthcare aide who was on her feet for 10 hours a day taking care of strangers. They didn't have much, but they had something that money genuinely cannot buy, and that's a household built on dignity. His mother used to say, and Officer Cole quoted this in an interview years before any of this happened, she used to say, "Baby, you don't have to be loud to be strong, and you don't have to be angry to be right." That sentence raised Darius Cole. He was not a perfect student. He'd tell you that himself. He was distracted, energetic, spent too much time on the basketball court and not enough on homework. But he was never in trouble. Never once. In a neighborhood where the pathways to trouble were wide and well lit and populated by people he knew. Cousins, classmates, friends from church. Darius walked a different road. He joined the LAPD at 26. Later than most because he'd spent his early 20s working, saving, and taking care of his younger brother after their father's health declined. He was not naive about what it meant to be a black man in law enforcement. He had conversations with himself about it, with his family, with his pastor. He understood the complicated history. He understood the tension. He chose the badge anyway, not to escape that tension, but because he believed, genuinely and without irony, that presence mattered, that a face like his, behind that shield, in that community, mattered. 12 years on the force, 3 commendations for service, 2 for bravery, one of which came after he ran into a burning apartment building to carry out an elderly woman whose neighbor had called 911. No sustained complaints. Ever. This was the man Karen Whitfield had called a racist. This was the man she had filed papers against, dragged into a civil suit, forced to spend his days off sitting in a production studio in downtown Los Angeles, defending his character, against accusations made by a woman he had spoken to for less than 4 minutes. 4 minutes, let that skin. An entire career, an entire life of service, sacrifice, and integrity. And it only took one woman, 4 minutes, and a sense of entitlement the size of a zip code to try to tear it down. Now, let's talk about what actually happened that day in the parking lot. The official record, not Karen's version. The official record. shows that it was a Saturday afternoon. Karen had driven her white Range Rover to a high-end grocery store in Calabasas, the kind of place where the parking lot is as manicured as the store itself. Officer Cole was there off duty, civilian clothes. He was picking up groceries for his mother. She'd had surgery the week before, and he was stopping by on his way to her house. Karen Whitfield parked her Range Rover across 2 spaces. Now, and I want to be precise here, because the details matter. She did not do this accidentally. Security footage, which we will get to in extraordinary detail later, shows her pulling in, straightening out, looking at the lines, and then pulling slightly forward so that her vehicle straddled both spots. It was a busy Saturday. The lot was nearly full. Officer Cole, who was walking back to his car with a grocery bag, noticed. He walked over, knocked on her window, politely, and this is documented. This is on record. Politely informed her that her vehicle was taking up 2 spaces, and that it might be worth pulling forward to free up the spot. Karen Whitfield rolled down her window, and the first words out of her mouth were not, "Oh, sorry about that." They were not, "Let me fix that right now." They were, "Excuse me, who do you think you are?" Darius Cole, calm as still water, explained that he was just pointing it out as a courtesy, that the lot was full, that other drivers might need the space. She looked him up and down, slowly, deliberately, and then she said, and this is documented in the police report she herself triggered by calling 911 approximately 8 minutes later. She said, "I don't know what you think you're doing approaching me like this, but I know your type, his type, and here's the psychological breakdown that you need to understand. That phrase, 'I know your type,' is not a spontaneous expression of frustration. That is a preloaded weapon. That is something a person reaches for when they want to communicate a hierarchy, when they want to remind someone that they believe they are above being questioned." Officer Cole said nothing in response to that. He simply nodded, said, "Have a good day, ma'am," and walked toward his car. And that calm, dignified, unbothered response is what broke her, because here's the thing about people who weaponize status. They expect a reaction. They expect you to flinch, to backtrack, to apologize, to become smaller. When you don't, when you simply stand in your dignity and leave, it unravels them completely. Karen Whitfield got out of her car. She followed him. She started raising her voice in the parking lot, drawing stares from other shoppers. She demanded to know who he was. She took out her phone and started recording him. And then she called 911. She told the dispatcher that a man had approached her vehicle aggressively, that she felt threatened, that she believed it was racially motivated. A black man, asking her politely to move her car, racially motivated. 2 patrol units responded. They spoke to both parties. They reviewed the situation. They noted the parking position. They took statements. And at the end of that interaction, every officer on scene concluded nothing had happened. No crime, no harassment, no threat. But Karen Whitfield wasn't finished. She filed the formal complaint the following Monday, against Officer Cole specifically, by name, and she smiled the whole way through it, just like she was smiling now, sitting in Judge Judy's courtroom, adjusting her blazer, getting ready to perform the role she had been rehearsing for 6 weeks. What she didn't know was that she had left something behind in that parking lot. Something small, something she never thought anyone would find, something that was sitting in a manila envelope on Judge Judy's desk right now. And when that envelope opened, nothing in that courtroom would ever be the same. Some people walk into a courtroom to seek justice. Some people walk in to perform it. And the moment Judge Judy called Karen Whitfield to speak, it became very, very clear which one she was. The bailiff's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Judith Sheindlin presiding. Every person in that gallery straightened. Not because they were told to, because Judge Judy has that effect on a room. She doesn't walk in, she arrives. There is a difference. And if you've ever watched her for more than 5 minutes, you already know. This is a woman who has sat across from thousands of liars, manipulators, victims, and frauds. She has heard every story, every excuse, every performance, and she is never, never fooled for long. She settled into her chair, adjusted the microphone, and opened the folder in front of her without looking up. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights. Then she looked up, first at Karen Whitfield, then at Officer Cole, then back at Karen. And here is where I need you to pay very close attention. Because what happened in the next 30 seconds was not just a legal proceeding. It was a masterclass in human psychology, being read in real time by one of the sharpest minds ever to sit behind a bench. Judge Judy studied Karen Whitfield the way a chess grandmaster studies a board. Not frantically, not with urgency, slowly, deliberately, taking in every detail, the blazer, the posture, the hands that were just slightly too still, the smile that was just slightly too confident. And then Judge Judy said, in that voice that has made CEOs flinch and con artists crumble, "Ms. Whitfield, you're the plaintiff today. That means you go first, and I want to be very clear before you begin. I have read every document in this file, every single one, so I would strongly encourage you to tell me the truth, because I already know more than you think I do." Pause. The gallery didn't move. Karen Whitfield's smile didn't waver. Not yet. She had rehearsed for this. She had told her story so many times that she had started to believe it herself, And that right there is the most dangerous stage of a lie. When the person telling it can no longer feel the difference between what happened and what they wish had happened. This is a classic psychological phenomenon called memory distortion through repetition. The more you tell a version of events, the more your brain encodes it as real. Karen Whitfield had been living inside her story for 6 weeks. She had told it to friends, to her attorney, to the complaint board, to the producers. She had become the victim in her own narrative, and she was about to perform that narrative in front of Judge Judy Sheindlin. God help her. She began speaking. Her voice was measured, practiced. She spoke with the cadence of someone who had rehearsed in front of a mirror. Not too fast, not too emotional, just the right amount of tremor when she got to the parts where she was supposed to seem scared. Your Honor, on the afternoon of September 14th, I was simply going about my day. I parked my vehicle and I was approached, aggressively, by this man. She gestured toward Officer Cole without looking at him. Classic move, acknowledge the opponent without granting them the dignity of eye contact. This is a dominance signal. She was trying to establish to the room that he was beneath her attention. He came to my window. He was loud. He was intimidating. He made me feel unsafe. And when I tried to de-escalate the situation, he became more aggressive. I genuinely feared for my safety, Your Honor. I had no idea who this man was. I didn't know he was a police officer. All I knew was that a large, aggressive man had approached my vehicle and was refusing to leave. She paused, let that image hang in the air. I called 911 because I was frightened, and I filed the complaint afterward because I believed that behavior, targeted, racially motivated harassment, needs to be on record. She folded her hands on the table, looked at Judge Judy with wide, sincere eyes, and then she waited. Now here's where things get very interesting, because Judge Judy did not respond immediately. She wrote something down, slowly. The scratch of her pen against paper was the only sound in the room. She wrote for approximately 10 seconds. Then she set her pen down. Then she looked at Karen Whitfield over the top of her glasses. And if you know Judge Judy, you know that look. That is not a neutral look. That is the look of a woman who has already made up her mind about you, but is giving you the professional courtesy of enough rope to hang yourself with. Ms. Whitfield, she said. Yes, Your Honor. You said he was aggressive. Yes. You said you had no idea who he was. That's correct, and you said you called 911 because you were frightened. Yes, Your Honor. I was terrified. Judge Judy nodded slowly, made another note. And your car, she said, still writing, not looking up. Where exactly was your car parked when this allegedly aggressive man approached your window? Karen Whitfield blinked, just once. A micro expression so fast that most people in the room missed it, but the cameras caught it. I was parked in the lot. In a parking space, one space, a half-second pause, so small, so precise, yes, and there it was, right there, that one word, that single quiet, unequivocal yes, was the moment Karen Whitfield's entire case began to collapse. She just didn't know it yet, because Judge Judy now had what she needed. She had Karen on record, under oath, claiming she parked in one space, and in that manila envelope on the corner of the desk, the one nobody had opened yet, the one that had been sitting there since before court was called to order, was the security footage from the parking lot. Footage that showed something very, very different. But before that envelope was opened, something else happened. Something that shifted the entire energy of the courtroom in a way that nobody had predicted. Officer Cole was asked to give his account. He stood, not because he had to, but because that is the kind of man Darius Cole is. He stood, straightened his shirt, and he spoke. No notes, no rehearsed cadence, no performed emotion. He spoke the way a man speaks when he is simply telling the truth, directly, quietly, with the kind of stillness that can only come from having absolutely nothing to hide. Your Honor, I was at the grocery store to pick up food for my mother. She just had surgery. I was in my civilian clothes, jeans and a jacket. I noticed the vehicle was parked across 2 spaces in a full lot. I walked over and knocked on the window. I said, politely, that the car was across the line and that other people might need the space. The woman inside told me she knew my type. I said, have a good day, and I walked to my car. She followed me, raised her voice, recorded me on her phone, and called 911. That is everything that happened. He sat down 7 sentences, no embellishment, no drama, and the gallery, that packed, standing room only gallery, exhaled like a single organism, because there is something about the truth, delivered plainly, that the human body recognizes. You feel it before you understand it. Like a tuning fork finding its frequency, people in that gallery felt it, and so did Judge Judy. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Karen Whitfield, and Karen Whitfield, for the very first time since she had walked through that door, looked uncomfortable. The smile was still there. But it had changed. It had gone from confident to fixed, like something that was being held in place by effort rather than ease. Notice that shift. Because that's not composure. That is a person fighting to maintain a mask that is starting to slip. Mrs. Whitfield, Judge Judy said quietly, I'm going to ask you one more time, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. The room went absolutely still. Are you certain, completely certain, that your vehicle was parked in a single space when Officer Cole approached your window? Karen Whitfield straightened, lifted her chin. Yes, Your Honor, absolutely certain. Judge Judy nodded one final time, reached for the manila envelope, and the courtroom held its breath. What came out of that envelope didn't just end Karen Whitfield's case. It ended the version of herself she had been selling to the world for 44 years. And nobody was ready for what happened next.